Welcome to the School of Laughs podcast, brought to you by schooloflaughs.com. Whether you're an aspiring comedian, a part-time pro, or a speaker who wants to become funnier, this is the podcast for you. We'll break down tools, tips, and techniques to help you get bigger, better, and more bookable. And now, here's the show.
Welcome to the School of Laughs podcast. Rick Roberts here. Today, episode 202, I've got my buddy Ric Walker. Ric Walker I met early on in the 1990s, like 1991 or 2 when I first started getting into comedy. He was part of an improv comedy troupe in Columbus, Ohio called Midwest Comedy Tool and Die. Tool and Die because they customize and make each show specific to the needs of that audience. How about that? Anyhow, Rick I knew from then. We worked together on the road many years, probably 8 or 9 years altogether. And then he moved to Chicago, where he started doing all kinds of crazy stuff, eventually leading up to his current position, teaching comedy at Columbia University. They have a 4-year college comedy program there. Did you know that? Man, I wish I could have taken that when I was in school. I would have been there early, stayed late, and graduated fast, because that's the kind of stuff I was into. But there was no place to do it back then. Now there is. Columbia University, my good buddy Ric Walker is a tenured staff member teaching those classes. He's done it all, so he teaches it all. We'll talk all about that here in just a second. I did want to say thanks to our episode sponsor this week. It's Donna Lewis. Donna from New York City. How about that? That's right. The real deal. Thank you, Donna, for supporting us through taking the online comedy class. You can also support us out there by joining Patreon and contribute just a little bit every month if you like the podcast to help us keep moving. All right, we're going to get right into it right now. I'll talk to you on the backside about some exciting things coming up here at the School of Laughs. But right now, my friend Ric Walker, who I knew and still know from early in my comedy days. I am sitting here with Ric Walker. How's it going, buddy?
Oh, it's all good. Yes, definitely.
Well, thanks for having me in your humble abode here in Chicago, where it all happens.
Oh, yeah. All the magic right here.
And Rick is a guy like I've known since early 90s. I would say 91 is probably when I first came across Rick and the improv group Midwest Comedy Tool and Die. But you guys had started earlier than that. I was kind of joining midstream. You guys were already had a fluid thing going on. When did you guys get together, and how did that look like?
So MCTD started, I think, around the summer of or the winter, the beginning of the year in '87, I think. And what had happened was there was a fledgling comedy sports in Columbus, and it failed after, I think, 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. So they had a short run, and so this woman, Lisa Phillips, took sort of the best of those folks. And then simultaneously, my brother and a couple of my friends from high school, Mike Loftus and Robert Holmes, were doing open mic nights while I was off at school. And I came home that summer, and they had been doing open mics, and I was like, I'm funny as they are.
Right.
Let me get in on this. And so we started playing, and then Lisa kind of came and took some of the open micers and some of the comedy sports people and put them together, and started MCTD.
And that's what I always, looking back now that I see there's so many types of improv and so many different types of groups, the thing that I liked about MCTD was it was very laugh driven. There was scene work, and you were an anchor. You and Jeff Gage both were an anchor of trying to make sure the scene had the proper elements of stagecraft. And then the rest of us would walk right to the screen door and into the refrigerator.
Well, we were very interested, especially when we first started. Because we didn't know a lot about comedy, but what we knew, we were like, these are the rules. And so one of the rules for the stand-ups were, the LPMs, laughs per minute. So we were very focused on those laughs per minute. I remember when we went to go study with Paul Sills up in Door County, who is one of the founding members of Second City. He ran workshops with improv groups. He hated us. We would go, and he would be like, "Stop the scene. This isn't improv. This is the 8th week of a sitcom. What are you guys doing?" And he'd drop F-bombs at us. But, I mean, we weren't doing what traditional improv was, what they were doing in Chicago. We were doing our own thing that was very much about audience appeal and fast play and just lots of laughs.
And that was that kind of the theme with the Improv Olympics back then, was the funnier group would advance, so it was kind of built into the DNA, or was that just from the stand-ups being in there?
You mean it with Comedy Sportz or with...
Yeah, with Comedy Sportz.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's set up, it's a short form show, like short scenario improv, but it's set up as a competition. So they're still trying to do, good, solid improv with relationships and all of that. But it's set up, it's a show, it's like big time wrestling.
Right.
Like, you're not really competing, but you're kind of competing.
Uh-huh.
And so that's the way it is with Comedy Sportz. So you're doing all those short format improv as opposed to long format like the Herald or something like that. That's what they do at Improv Olympic. When we first started MCTD, we didn't know a lot of improv, but we did know some structures that they had learned from Comedy Sportz and some things that we had read about. Then we invented a lot of games and, but they were very much for the show and very much for, laughs.
Right.
So we weren't getting deep into relationships. And
so there was like a shorthand to it just to kind of get on the same page.
Oh yeah. So yeah, making those laughs happen quickly. And we weren't patient either with it. So, the audience didn't have to be patient. We weren't patient. We were trying to get to the funny fast. Right.
And I don't know, when I joined the group in 91, so you guys had been together since 87 or so, you said. So that's a good chunk of time that you guys had built relationships, and you had kind of the bond of, I kind of know where he might go with this in the scene and that kind of thing.
Well, to add to that, I mean, my brother was one of the original members and my two best friends from high school. So Mike and Robert.
So you had all that history.
So, I mean, we used to just sit in the car and drink beer and rhyme peanut as many times as we could,
right.
or whatever. Yeah. I mean, we didn't even know what improv was really at that point, but we were just practicing improv skills or doing goofy characters, just talking, trying to make each other laugh, sitting in the parking lot. you know?
That's like a great shorthand kind of. You have all those just like every friend have. You could just say the word green and I know what you're talking about, and you had that, but you were able to take that and be with those guys on stage and create something with it. I'm in Chicago with Rick, and on the flight up here, I was thinking about some of the crazy times, and like we had our van stolen once.
Oh, that was hilarious.
And it was somewhere in Michigan, somewhere between Grand Rapids and Sault Ste. Marie or somewhere. It was in the middle of the state. Maybe, I think it was Lansing, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it could be. What I remember about it, though, is that it had freshly snowed. Alan, I think, was warming up the van and came back in, and we're all like being long, lingering goodbyes to whoever, we're hanging out with. And we come out, and the van is gone, and we can see the tracks.
Right.
So some of us, I think, where it had tried to drive away. So Jeff, I think, took off running down, follow the tracks. Some of us went in to
stay warm.
Yeah, stay warm, call the police, whatever. I think I ran with Jeff for a minute, but then I was like, nah, this is stupid. Why would I run after a van by following its tracks? But Jeff tracked it down. They had stopped, and Jeff caught the guy. And as Jeff said, I talked him down.
Yeah, you don't want this horrible van. You won't even get another mile on this thing.
Right. This guy was seriously drunk, just like a drunk jerk. And Jeff beat him up a little bit and sat on him until the cops got there.
That is so funny. There's a lot of odd little things. Almost every week there was some kind of craziness going on. And those were good days. And, it lasted several years, 6 or 7 at least, when I was with it.
I wanted to tell this because I'll always remember this, and I still use this kind of approach. We were up in Upper Peninsula somewhere or in Wisconsin, and a snowstorm came as we were riding into town to go do our show that night, there was a big snowstorm, and it's like, are they going to cancel the show? I hope they cancel the show, but they didn't cancel the show. And like, there were 6 people there. And, we kind of wanted to cancel this show, but we went on, and, instead of doing the normal intro, I think it was Jeff, just instead of doing, it was his turn to intro the show. And instead of doing the normal intro, he's like, "Hey, I'm Jeff Gage. What's your name?" And he just went, and we just ended up just introducing ourselves to each member of the audience and so on. And then we went back on stage, and it was more like a parlor game, or, a series of parlor games, and it was such a memorable experience. And the audience had this really great time. We had a great time. And we, instead of it being like a miserable night where we performed for 6 people, it ended up being this really great night where we shared a couple of hours, an hour and a half with these people, this intimate show, and then ended up hanging out and chatting with them well after the show was over.
Yeah, it's one of those things where Jeff, I don't know if he did that on purpose or intuitively, but it changed the expectations of the experience. Like, it would be weird to not acknowledge there's just 6 people and to go up and try to perform a show like you would do in front of 300. I mean, mentally you want to give it that energy, but you can't keep the same expectation of, it's so demanding of the audience to laugh at, 90 minutes and there's only 6 of them. There's like all those different dynamics that change when you kind of get to know them a little bit, and like, hey, we're all in this together. God bless you for coming out. We're going to figure out how to make this work. And it turned out to be a super night.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things that it's hard to do that if you're new or newish. It takes that kind of comfort level.
And then that has been a lesson that I've carried with me. I mean, luckily, I haven't had to use that very often. I've been part of a lot of, successful shows, but, sometimes it comes up and there's just a few people.
You got to kind of let them know that
Yeah.
That's you just acknowledging what's going down. It's part of, I don't know, there's such a big authenticity movement in comedy these days where it has to be real and it has to be which I, I like a comic that I can believe, but I don't have to believe everything. The suspension of disbelief is enough for me, but there's so many people that won't talk about something unless it actually happened. And it turns out nothing ever actually happened interesting in their day. So you sit there and watch the guy talk about being at Starbucks for 45 minutes.
Oh boy, that sounds like a real treat.
Horrific. So towards the end of the 90s, we were kind of all heading different directions with things. One of our guys went off California to pursue stand-up and now writes for a bunch of guys and still does stand-up. One had gone to Nashville to try to do some songwriting, just various things. You went to Chicago to get more into improv.
Actually, I moved here to get away from improv and to get back into theater. And when I first came to Chicago, I was doing theater around town, and one thing led to another, and I ended up doing a lot of corporate spokesman work.
Yeah, I remember staying, crashing at your place when I play Zanies up here. And some days you'd be like in a little suit and you're headed out the door at 9 a.m. I'm like, this is different. Yeah. Where you headed? And you had these spokesperson gigs where they would give you a script, and some of them were pretty long. Instead of memorizing word for word, you would speak them into a recorder, a tape recorder, like one of those small ones, micro cassette or whatever, and then have an earpiece. And somehow, like, I still this day wonder how you record that, hear it, and then still say it and stay in time with it, and are able to pause it or interact. Like, tell me how that went down.
Yeah, so it's called an ear prompter, and basically, it's the script playing in your ear, and I had like a wireless setup, so you couldn't even see that. It's like a really tiny hearing aid looking thing. It goes in your ear, and you wear this thing called a loop, and it broadcasts the signal from your recorder. I would have on the rig that I had a little pause button that I could Velcro to my belt. And so I could stop it, if I needed to, or if something went wrong or whatever. But basically you're just repeating yourself right after you hear it in your ear. And you could do an hour-long presentation, as long as your read is clean, you can do you can now. It's better if you can like rehearse with it a bit, and it's just prompting you, like the lines and what's coming up, and it's just prompting you. But it's also possible to do like 2 hour. I know guys that would do 4-hour presentations.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Like, because what do you do with the other voices in your head that are already there? And you got to listen to this one part. It's like a chorus.
Well, that's called therapy and medication. So.
That is cool. And you would do some of those gigs, and you had gotten into doing some Shakespearean based improv, and you still do that. For people that have no idea what that is like, tell me how you structure those kinds of shows.
2006, I think we started Improvised Shakespeare, or Blaine Swin started it. And so I still do it. And I'm currently the Chicago director and run things here. I'll be doing that show tonight, 2 of them. So it is based loosely on the Herald format. So it's without getting too into the weeds with what a Herald is, a long form improv where you have like a group game, then 3 beats, 3 different scenes, and then Herald would go back into a group game, 3 beats, group game, 3 beats, bring it to an end. So our first beat, our first act is about 45 minutes. We start out with a prologue where we've kind of developed over the years. We start with a prologue. We get a suggestion for a title. First thing is a prologue. One of the guys will come out and do, rhyming couplets, exploring the topic, the title. And then, one of last night's titles was Salty Cupcake. And so they played with rhyming couplets talking about a salty cupcake for a couple of minutes. Then the first scene, we meet we meet a king or somebody. We meet some major characters they have once. Then the second scene, we meet the conflicting character or something. And then a third scene. And then we do it usually a group game slot. And then that's usually the end of the first act. And then during intermission, we just kind of talk about what are the names of the characters I just played? What do they want? And no pre-planning or anything like that. We just kind of talk about what's already happened, where we are. And then the second act is just real loose. Whatever happens, we just know it's going to come to an end where, in Shakespeare, there are really 3 kinds of plays. There are comedies, where at the end, everybody gets married. There are the tragedies. In the end, everyone dies. Right. And the histories where it's some combination of those 2 things. And so we just kind of
see where it takes you.
Yeah. And whether it makes sense for everyone to get married at the end or everyone to get buried.
That's great. And for tonight shows, you're doing 2. Are they 90 minutes? Or they?
Yeah, they're about 90 minutes, 90 to 95.
That's great. And how many players will you have in the group?
5. Well, tonight I think we'll have 4 because it's just the way it worked out. But normally we would always have 5 players. And there are about 13 players that I schedule to take those 5 slots.
Gotcha.
But we do 5 shows a week, every week.
And for people that listen that live in Chicago or come through, what's the name of the venue and your group?
Improvised Shakespeare at I.O. Chicago.
Great.
Formerly the Improv Olympic.
Yeah. So, and I know we've got plenty of listeners in Chicago, so make sure you check Rick out and tell him that you heard him on the podcast and you know me, and then he'll look at you and go, sorry about that. Sorry, you know that dude. So that's cool. And I wish I could stick around and see it tonight firsthand, but I have to jet out here in a little bit.
Next time
for sure.
There's always shows.
Yeah, and I think, maybe next time I'll speak to your class. Now, Rick not only does improv and has done all kinds of performance, but tell me about your new position, exactly what your title is and how long you've been doing it.
Well, I am lucky enough to teach in the first comedy major in the country. So it's a 4-year program. It's at Columbia College, and it's the comedy writing and performance major. So it's a BA program. And after the woman that started it, Ann Libra, started it, I was the first full-time hire. I got interested in teaching some years ago, and I ended up going back to grad school because I was very interested in teaching on the college level. And when I graduated, I came back to Chicago and went back to my improv life for a while. And then I was lucky enough to get hired into the one job that I really wanted.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I heard that. I'm like, man, I wish they had this in Nashville. I'd maybe settle down and hunker down and do it. So tell me about
And so I'm, I just this year I'm starting a new position where I'm on a tenure track position. So I've got a nice raise and it's a nice promotion for me. So I'm more than just a full-time. I'm really committed to this program, this school, and the school is showing its commitment to me as well.
That's cool. So you have input on the vision of everything now as well, and kind of like where it's going to head and what you can add to it.
Yeah, and luckily I've always kind of had that because I designed the freshman experience and then moved on to work on the sophomore experience, and so so I've created a number of classes at the school. And I have a lot of fun because I get to teach everything that I've been doing over the last 35 years. So I teach stand-up. I have a stand-up class that I teach on Fridays. I teach writing, sketch writing. So I worked at Second City for a number of years and got pretty familiar with writing sketch. And I love acting, just straight ahead acting. So I get to teach that. So the freshman experience is, the first semester is focused on writing, joke writing, and then using that writing across mediums. So we write, stand up, we write videos, we do blackouts, and then we do sketches, and the semester culminates in a mini sketch show. And then the spring semester, the second semester of the freshman year, is focused on character and point of view. And so we do clown, we do commedia, we do dramatic scenes, we do comedic scenes, and then they pitch a character piece. So it could be solo sketch or it could be scene work for a big final performance.
That's pretty cool, man. I might just have to go back to school.
It really is awesome. It is like all the stuff that I wish that I had gotten in undergrad, because it's all the stuff that I ended up doing throughout my career.
Right.
Because I've always performed and I've always written. Even though I originally my ambition was to be an actor, I kept finding myself in the situation where instead of waiting to be given work, I would create work. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big part of what MCTD was just us creating our own work, not waiting for somebody to hire us.
Right. Yeah. Especially the local stuff that was just, there was nights where, there was some parts of Midwest Comedy Show that if I remember, we could have 4 nights in a row.
Oh yeah.
So we did Friday, Saturday at the Hey Hey Club, and we did Thursday at one place, and we'd find, a Wednesday to do here. And it was almost,
we had the comedy club, we had Ruby Tuesdays, and we had Hey Hey. We were doing 4 shows a week in town.
Yeah. So it's almost easier to stay back instead of hitting the road with it.
Yeah.
That's cool. Now with your classes, how many people are enrolled in this track of comedy?
I think we have 225 students.
It's a pretty popular.
It's popular major. And luckily, we just hired some other full-time faculty because it was Ann Libera and I full-time, and then a number of adjuncts carrying that workload of all of those students. So I just met my newest 70 kids yesterday. The freshmen, where we had a big sort of icebreaker session where I talked to them a little bit about the program and then ran them through a bunch of exercises.
That's great.
Learn some names.
Well, I think it's just amazing that I'm sure some people take a major because their dad was a doctor or whatever, but I'd imagine all 70 of these kids are like, this is awesome. Like the enthusiasm. Do you see that, or do you still see they're a student and they don't like to do the work, or do you think they're a little more invested?
It's a mix. I'd say there's a third that are like, this is my life. This is the only thing I've ever wanted to do. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. There are a third that are, gung ho and really ready to make, to commit to the work. There's a third that are like, I think this is what I want to do. This looks cool. Yeah.
Kind of kick the tires a little bit.
Yeah. And, they probably would be very successful most of these kids, almost all of them would be very successful no matter what they try to do because they're intellectually curious and, for the most part, and ambitious and, they would, and smart. I would say our students are very smart and a lot of them are very motivated, and so they'd be successful anywhere. But then there's a third that are like, I don't know what I want to do. This looks like a fun thing to do. Oh, comedy requires all this work. What? I thought it was just being funny. And it's like, no, there's a lot of discipline and craft to it too. So so it's a wake up.
Kind of an eye opener for some of those.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. Obviously I teach classes now too, and that the advantage of taking a class for people who are interested in something, no matter what the field is, it's such a primer. It gives you some foundation and some structure for the art. Like, the argument I always hear from people, you can't teach people how to be funny, whatever. And I'm like, well, I can teach them how to get there a lot faster if they know what road they're on. I can teach them the structure so they're not spending as much. I always tell people, it took me 10 or 12 years to even know why I was getting laughs. I didn't know what the technique was I was using until I started to learn them so I could teach a class, So having that built in, it's, in these young ages. And do you have also older people coming back to school that are getting into this program at all?
Oh yeah. Especially a lot of vets.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really great. There are definitely older people. I do love that they can avoid some of the pitfalls that we had to go through. Trying to figure this stuff out, because we weren't taught comedy. But I think you can't teach people talent. You can't give them natural talent, but you can give them a lot of the craft, a lot of the philosophies behind. I mean, some of the older comics that were ahead of us, like I remember Frankie Bastille and Rich Jenny giving us advice, and just like these older guys that gave us advice on how to approach the work. And, that was very helpful. Now, you can get this in a very concentrated form at school.
Yeah.
So you can I think it's a huge advantage to come in at 18 and get all these hours of work and guidance and feedback.
I couldn't even imagine just the amount of work. I mean, you've put together courses, you've experienced the life, you've curated the techniques and the skills, how to tweak the skills and coach up the skills, plus see the structure behind all the writing. It's like, I'm kind of feeling like I might want to just move up here for 4 years and go through the whole thing. What have been some eye-opening things for you as an instructor? I'll hit it from two angles. One, of something that you were able to do that you never had thought would come with the position of teaching and instructing comedy. And then maybe we'll come back in a minute to a realization one of your students have had where you're like, wow, I didn't even know that's what I was teaching, but they picked up that.
Those are great questions. Things that I think something that I didn't realize is just, it can be exhausting, just like thinking all the time, like evaluating, trying to figure out how to make this student better, that student better. It can be very tiring, but the other side of that is there's so many talented kids. These folks are so talented that it's really amazing to watch how inventive they can be, and they'll come up with, I give them a lot of prompts. I'm not telling them exactly how to do it, but the solutions that they come up with sometimes are like, oh, that is so fantastic. Like, I never would have thought of approaching it that way. And then you get to see that creativity unleashed. What was the second part of that question?
Well, you kind of answered it both there in one sentence, but how something that a student has done where it surprised you that they maybe picked up something in between the words that you were saying as a teacher, but they somehow got info, and it made
one of my goals as a teacher is not to, because I am interested in unleashing your creativity. I'm not like a real didactic kind of teacher where it's like 2 + 2 is 4. I'm more like, the target is over there. You're going to have to tell me the bullseye that you're going for, and I will help you hit that bullseye. But I can show you where the target is, and I can give you the bow and the arrow, but you have to tell me where the bullseye is, and I'll help you hit that. So you have to be really flexible with each student. At the same time, please use this bow and this arrow. But, so I can give them some of the tools, but not all of the, I can't necessarily tell them where that bullseye is.
Right.
And so my feedback has to be, I have to stay awake. I have to actually listen, to what the students are doing. And sometimes they're mad that, where they hit the target. And I'm like, that wasn't the bullseye that we agreed to, and sometimes they don't like the feedback that I give them, but it's always given with, hey, I'm just trying to help you get that bullseye.
Right. And that's another thing, like as opposed to math where there is a specific answer, there might be a couple different ways to solve the problem, but it needs to end up as X or what have you. With comedy being a subjective thing, like, you can't, or do you have like the funny scale of like, that was a 1 out of a 10 laugh that I got, but you got the 1, and then you like, how do you take it from being a personal rejection to the student when you give them feedback that they wouldn't have if it was math? Oh, you got this wrong. Here's how you do it. With comedy, you're like, man, that just
right. So I do have to kind of like limit it to, here is the bow and here is the arrow. Like, you can't use this other bow and arrow. You can't use this sword, to hit the target. Like, you have to use these tools, and that's what I'm going to evaluate. Did you use those tools? Another thing is with the evaluation, I try not to think about like, that is definitely like, this kind of humor is definitely not my taste. I try not to let that confuse whether or not they actually employed the tools. And I'll tell them pretty frankly, like, hey, this is not my kind of humor, but the question I have for you is this how you want to represent yourself? What is the integrity that you're entering into this work? Are you saying this just because you think it gets a laugh, or are you saying this because you think it's a truth that you find funny?
And I'd imagine early on they do take a lot of the short, quick laugh type approaches before they learn how to develop and then trust the development that they've had with the classes.
And when they do, sometimes the feedback is, I expect more from you. You are here studying this to take it to a higher level. Challenge yourself to meet that higher level.
Yeah. Something I've started to not grapple with, but explore as a concept is not connecting with an audience through lowest common denominator, but instead the highest common connection that we would have with that audience. Right.
Often you just have to take them there. You just have to show them. They don't have to necessarily connect with you, but they have to be able to connect with the thought that you're having. Like, illuminate it for them, and they'll see the inside of the cave if you light it up for them.
Right.
And that's your job as the performer, the storyteller, the comedian, is to illuminate something for the audience and show them some new way of looking at it that they can say, oh man, that's a new way of thinking. It's a whole different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I would love to see the light bulbs going off in the room, because I'm sure that's the reward as a teacher as much as anything else, is when they do get it. I see it with my own students when they finally flip the switch on some things, like, oh, it's not that it was hard. I just didn't know what it felt like to do it. And now that I've done it, I can repeat the process, and I can, I know it's going to take a little while to get there, so I'm not going to get frustrated when I get halfway there and quit.
Yeah.
Like, how early do you see some of those light bulbs going off with your kids?
Some kids, it's every single class. They're like, every time they try something new, they're like, oh my God, this is so cool. And some kids, for all kinds of different reasons, it's a little slower for them to grab onto it. And I think for comedians, fledgling comedians, beginning comedians, like, we're a skeptical bunch. We look at the world through a lens like, is that necessary? Is that real? And sometimes that can get in the way of the student. The student needs to be more of an open vessel and to try things. And sometimes the comedy student, comedians don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be told what to think.
Right.
We're resistant, So I get it. But it gets in the way of learning and teaching.
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of what you have in front of you are kids and adults who want to take a chance on something that they haven't done before. They do have their built-in skepticism about things, but they have to find in a group setting how to share ideas that are accepted as humorous as well as accepted as whatever the assignment would be. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah,
like I'm trying to think if I would find that incredibly intimidating as a new student, or just like, hey, every day, this is the way I approach it now. Every day is an experiment. I just need to get results to find out if the experiment went right or not.
Yeah, it doesn't have to go right every time. I mean that you don't learn as much when everything works.
Right.
It's when things don't work. It's like, oh, I just need to shift it this way. That's how it works. So being successful every time isn't probably not very helpful.
No, it cancels out all of your creativity because you're editing as you're creating. If you're trying to do something perfect. Yeah. And you have to create, then go back and edit with the other half of your brain. And, when I first started, I didn't realize that was the way that the brain worked. Even with my college education, nobody explained to me there's a creative side, there's an analytical. So I would sit there and try to write a joke, and I'd just stare at it. And I would, as soon as I was writing something like that's stupid, I'd cross it out. And I didn't give myself permission to explore it. Yeah. And the one thing I learned from the improv group when I joined was, oh man, it's all about exploration and then finding out where you're at. And if it works, then duplication. But it's not about trying to do it perfect the first time because that's nearly impossible.
Right. I love the Hemingway quote of write drunk, edit sober.
Yeah.
So it's just like give yourself permission to say whatever. And then you can always, that's the beauty of the editing process. And that's what, it's super important for students to understand is like it's revision. Revision is the job. Mm-hmm. So, you're not, in improv, you only have one chance and it's right here in this moment and it's all one big inside joke between you and the audience. You all have the same information. It is what it is. But anything that's like a repeatable performance like stand-up would be is, it's about the revision. It's not just about the writing. Mm-hmm. It's that performance, that feedback that you get from the audience and then you revise and then you perform it again, get the feedback and you revise so that you end up with a joke that works every time for every audience, mm-hmm. hopefully. Those are really magical jokes, right?
I'm curious, and I'm sure it's been the case where some of your students have said some things out loud in class, either as a result of homework or as experimenting, where it's like, with the politically correctness of our world today, like first, the thought wasn't even like funny, and maybe second it was like, whoa, is that who you really are down and deep, or were you just trying to do that to get a laugh? What do you do in those situations to not only let the student know that we need some parameters here in the class, but also let the other students know, hey, I got this, let me see if I can fix this real quick?
That has on occasion come up, not in a while. I do want there to be, you've heard of safe spaces. I do want the classroom to be a place where you can risk failing, and let's not talk about it outside of class. Like whatever happens here, let's try and keep this, a brave space where people can make mistakes, that they can feel emboldened to make mistakes. But sometimes there is something where it's just like so malicious. It's just like, is this what? But I try not to shame them for that. I have been accused of trying to shame students, but it's always about they didn't do enough work mm-hmm. on, like they weren't rehearsed.
Right.
They didn't put in the time. That's the thing that, you're wasting everyone's time by being up there for, your 4 minutes or whatever. And you clearly did not plan,
right,
craft, or work on this piece. And, it's hard to give feedback on that other than you need to put in the time. That's what it is. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to shame anybody for trying a joke that fails. We all have jokes.
Yeah.
And so, just think about, but you can preempt a lot of that by thinking, is this how you want to represent yourself?
Right. And I'm sure that the reaction from the joke that didn't go where they thought it would be, maybe that's all it needs to happen.
All that's necessary. But sometimes it is just like, okay, let's discuss this. Let's see if we can give this the proper framing. Because in the stand-up class that I teach, I do try and take some time to fix a joke, because mm-hmm. sometimes it's just structure, and I can help them go through and fix the structure of it. If you change the wording, if you give it a different frame, tweak your premise. But sometimes it's just like unpacking, like, what are you trying to say with this joke? And let's see if we can make it work. And sometimes it's just like, I'm not sure that this is a worthy thing to work on.
That's true. Yeah. And you said something there that I say to myself all the time when I'm writing is, what am I trying to say? Because you'll explore sometimes 6 different half premises that go certain, because you're just trying to hit every angle and see what works. But usually after you explore it for a while, you can just say to yourself, like, if I had to tweet this out, what am I trying to say? And get it really boiled down into this is, and so this is where my point of view is in the joke. And I can take that, and that now is my premise that says everything. It says those 5 different things, or it eliminates 4 of those and only says one thing. But I finally know what I'm saying, so now the audience has one clear path to follow. Right.
That their brain is going in the direction that you want it to. That target assumption you want them to have, or that story that you want playing in their brain, so that in as few words as possible to get that as many images that are hitting that target assumption. Right.
Yeah. I always say you can't have misdirection if they have no idea which direction they're going.
Oh, right. Yeah. You can't pull the rug out from under if they're not on that rug.
No, they're like, there were 17 rugs in here. I guess he's just going to take that one outside and beat it for a while. But that's typical, though, of a new performer, a new writer, new comedy, new stand-up person is like, you're just saying what sounds like comedy to you.
Yeah.
But if you don't know the structure, then you are probably saying 6 things and the audience has no idea which one they're supposed to follow.
And I think, that's where I always start is like, here is a simple structure, a way of thinking. And through this filter, are your jokes, can they go through this filter? Do they have this, is your premise clear? Does it create a target assumption? Does it give them, like a story? And is there a simple way that you are changing that story with that punchline? Mm-hmm. Is the language sharp? Is there rhythm to it? Sometimes all it needs is like that connection between that punchline and that setup. Is that connection clear?
Mm-hmm. Is it close enough to where they still remember the setup so that the punchline lands? Sometimes there's just too much in the middle, right?
Oh yeah. So in the end, that's all part of the craft. So will your joke stand up to these parameters?
Mm-hmm. Where do you fall in the line of thinking of putting yourself in the joke? Like, I know it's not easy for brand new comics and writers to put their heart and soul and who they are into every joke. But the further you get into it, I think there should be the audience should know why I'm telling this joke. Why is this important to Ric Walker? At what point in the game do they kind of learn to focus on that a little bit? Or
so
do
I
they?
think that there's a few parts to that, because part of it is what are the stakes of the joke, and if there are no personal stakes, then it's probably not important. Mm-hmm. The more important it is, the funnier it is, I think. Or if it's really important to you, but it's a really mundane. I mean, that's Seinfeld's. His whole career is built on it's really important to him, but it's really mundane, right? Mm-hmm. So there is that. So there are high stakes. Everything is high stakes. There's also like that point of view issue and the students, especially when they're 19, it
won't even be the same point of view 4 years from now. Maybe not even next year.
Yeah, I mean,
or next semester.
Yeah. There's that too. I mean, it's like if they should be looking back at the material that they're writing now and being like, oh, that's trash, because their writing is supposed to get better. Right. Like, it's all supposed to get better as you progress. So there's that. But also, I'm just thinking like, if when I was 19, I didn't really have a strong sense of who I was. I mean, sometimes I still grapple with that, but really back then it was more like wearing a personality like a coat. Like, this is a good coat. I love this coat, but I could change my coat.
Right.
Who I was not that firmly entrenched, or my knowledge of myself was not that firmly entrenched. I was pretty much myself, but I just didn't know how to define that.
Yeah. And at that age too, I think you're pretty malleable to where whatever group of friends you're hanging out with, that can really skew you 50% of who you are easily.
For sure. So there's that aspect of point of view. So I try not to get too bogged down in that, because I think that's going to change so much. So getting some good joke writing technique and then building that into the stories that you want to tell. I think for me, that's more important and easier to kind of like see.
Sure. And the point of view will evolve as you become more crafted and skillful at expressing your ideas, you'll be more able to dial up your precise point of view on not only just per topic, but kind of your life view as you move through it. So I'm glad to hear you don't put too much emphasis on that early.
Writing a sharp joke that you can deliver in a with punch. Yeah.
That's cool.
And like keeping your feet planted and, not making a lot of noise with the microphone as you're, these things are easier this part of the craft is easier to handle.
Yeah. This is where I think it's a lot like golf. There's a million techniques in every golf swing, and you can break down the twisting of the mic cord or the moving of the stand or the leaning on the stand instead of like playing through, there's easily 15 to 20 things that you could watch somebody in 1 minute and say, stop, let's correct that right now, as far as the physical technique of things. I guess I'll kind of wrap on this thought just to kind of give you a broad question, but just because I'm curious, with some of the students you have, like you just met 70, you said.
Yeah.
So pretty quick introduction, pretty quick, just kind of looking them over. Can you ever spot, or have you been able to spot somebody like really early on going, oh, this is going to be a great student to have in class? Or conversely, have you spotted one go, oh, this is going to be physically and mentally draining?
Usually as a teacher, and you have like 15, 20 people in your class that you have to manage. The ideal student is somebody that always comes in prepared, always, is earnest and fun. And, so those people are great, and they're not necessarily the most talented people. And sometimes it can be really frustrating. The most talented, like charismatic person is not necessarily the hardest worker or the one that is easy to be around. So it's like a double-edged sword. Like the ideal student would have all of those things, but in a practical sense, yeah. So but I think I've been around so many tremendously talented people, and it's inexplicable to me how some people break and some people don't, like how some people become famous and some people don't. Like I know so many talented people. I don't know what that intangible is.
Yeah. When we've seen it over the course of 20, almost 30 years, people that we saw when we were working in clubs and you in theater and in improv, and there's some people that, given the correct connections and timing, would blow anything that we've seen on TV or movies out of the water, but for whatever reason, it doesn't line up that way.
One of the things that a core part of the things that I teach are these 10 things that require no talent. And it's just like being on time, being coachable, being prepared, it's just 10 things. These require no talent, doing extra. And if you have talent and you have 7 of these things, you're going to have a career.
Right.
If you have talent and you have 2 of these things, you are not going to have a career.
Right. I'll get the full list of those 10 and put them in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah,
I want to see if I can do any of these.
I can share them with you immediately.
Rick, it's been good seeing you, buddy.
Oh, man, my man.
I'm glad it worked out. It's been too long, as they say.
That is true.
Let's not make it that long next time.
Time flies.
I'll come back within a year and teach a session at your school.
Please.
Cool, man. Thank you.
All right. My pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed that interview with Ric Walker. Wasn't that cool? Did you know you could take a college major and major in comedy? Man, if that had been around, if that had only been around. Hey, if you're a Patreon member, check the inbox, your email inbox, because there's a little bonus podcast that Rick and I did after recording this one that's available just for members of Club 52. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that in a couple different ways. One, simply leave us an iTunes review. Second, join the Insider Tip Sheet by shooting me an email at schooloflaughs@gmail.com. Thirdly, you can support us through Patreon, where you can choose to contribute one-time or a continuing donation each month to help us get these podcasts edited and mastered. And thanks to our editor and master podcast editor, Doc Kennedy. All right, that's going to do it for now. All kinds of cool stuff happening in early 2020, including the Master Laughter class designed specifically for speakers and content creators, CEOs, people who speak in front of groups but may not want to be a comedian, but might like to punch up their programs with humor so that they're well-liked, well-received. People begin to know, like, and trust you through comedy, and then your message is received quicker so your impact can be larger. If you're interested in that, it's a day-and-a-half program. It's going to be here in Nashville, Tennessee, first week of January 2020. If all things coalesce, shoot me an email, rick@masterlaughterclass.com. And you can also go to masterlaughterclass.com to find out more information. Thanks again for supporting the podcast. Thanks again to Donna Lewis for being our supporter for this particular episode. Stay safe and stay funny.
Thanks for listening to the School of Laughs podcast. If you'd like to hear more School of Laughs podcasts, you can find them on iTunes and Stitcher.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. For information on upcoming live and online classes, visit schooloflaughs.com. Until next time, stay tuned, stay focused, and stay funny.